In wrestling, strength doesn't just win you matches, it wins you enemies. And trust me, Ken Patera had plenty. Today, we're breaking down 4 wrestlers who absolutely hated Ken and how these feuds made him so popular. Let's get into it. Guys, Ken Patera was not just strong, he was one of the strongest men alive. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, in a Czech-American family, sports were in his blood. He started with track and field, excelling in hurdles and the high jump. But then came the moment that changed his life. A bad ankle injury in high school forced him to give up those events. For many, that would have been the end. For Ken, it was only the start. He tried something else. At Brigham Young University, he became one of the top throwers in the country. But finishing only 6th at the 1968 Olympic trials pushed him to make a huge decision. He gave up throwing and committed himself fully to Olympic weightlifting, and it paid off. Between 1969 and 1972, Ken dominated. 4 straight national titles, a Pan American gold medal, a world silver, and records that made history. He became the first American to clean and jerk over 500 pounds. Not only that, he was the only one to clean and press the same weight. These weren't stunts. They were real feats of power that left crowds in awe. So when the 1972 Olympics arrived, everyone believed Ken would bring home a medal. But fate had other plans. A bad knee and the removal of his best lifts, the clean and press, ended his chances. His Olympic dream was gone in an instant. He couldn't be an Olympian, but he sure became the feud king of wrestling. Here are 4 massive feuds that truly defined his career and made him the ginormous figure that he is in wrestling. At first, though, he wasn't a villain at all. In 1975, when he showed up in Jim Crockett Promotions, he was actually a good guy. He was introduced as wrestling's strongest man. The Olympic background, the polite and soft-spoken personality, it all made him easy to cheer for. On TV, he came across as humble, even friendly, and fans respected him. His first big feud came against Johnny the Champ Valentine, the United States heavyweight champion. And this is where you start to see the clever side of Ken Patera. Valentine had this thing he called the 2,000 silver dollar challenge. Each week, he'd pull a name out of a fishbowl to give someone a title shot. But he never wanted to fight Patera. So one night, Patera pulled a sneaky move. During a commercial break, he switched all the names in the bowl with his own. When Valentine pulled the random name on live TV and saw it was Patera, he nearly exploded. Fans loved it. It was one of those moments where you realize this guy wasn't just strong, he was smart too. Their matches were brutal. Patera would crush Valentine with bear hugs and headlocks that looked like they could squeeze the air out of him. Even when Valentine managed to win, he often walked away battered and broken. The feud made Patera look like a serious singles competitor. But more importantly, it showed that behind the polite smile, there was a mean streak waiting to come out. By 1977, that mean streak had taken over completely. The friendly Olympic hero was gone. In his place was an arrogant villain with bleached blonde hair, bragging about his strength, cheating in matches, and showing zero respect for the fans. He even started using brutal moves like the swinging neckbreaker and the full Nelson. And in one storyline, he broke another wrestler's neck with it. That kind of cruelty got him real heat. In fact, Pro Wrestling Illustrated named him Most Hated Wrestler of the Year in 1977 and again in 1981. And then came his biggest rivalry, Bruno Sammartino. Bruno wasn't just the champion of the WWF. He was the hero, the living legend, the guy who had carried the company for years. Fans adored him. He represented hard work, toughness, and dignity. So when Ken Patera came along, it was like watching a nightmare unfold. Here was a man who was every bit as real and every bit as strong as Bruno, but who chose to use that strength to cheat, to hurt, and to brag. Fans hated Patera with a passion, and because he was legitimate, they truly believed he could beat Bruno. That fear made the rivalry white hot. Every time they wrestled, the crowds went insane. Madison Square Garden sold out again and again. This wasn't just about wrestling, it was about values. Bruno stood for respect. Patera stood for arrogance. Bruno fought for pride. Patera fought for ego. It was the unstoppable force versus the immovable object, and the fans couldn't get enough. Now, after Ken Patera's battles with Bruno Sammartino, you'd think that was the peak of his career. But honestly, his feud with Bob Backlund from 1978 to 1981 might have been even bigger for him. It wasn't just one match or one storyline. It was this long, drawn-out rivalry that kept coming back for years. In 1980 alone, they wrestled each other more than 30 times. 30 times in 1 year. That's how hot this feud was. Fans just couldn't get enough of seeing these two go at it. And here's the crazy part. During all of this, Patera did something nobody else had ever pulled off. He became the Intercontinental Champion in the WWF, and then just 4 days later, he won the Missouri Heavyweight title in the NWA. 2 major titles at the same time, in 2 different territories. Back then, that was unheard of. It proved he wasn't just a side character. He was one of the biggest heels in the entire business, someone trusted to carry main events wherever he went. The match everyone remembers came in May of 1980 at Madison Square Garden, a Texas death match between Patera and Backlund. Now, this wasn't the usual WWF style of the time. It wasn't clean or safe. It was messy, violent, and it told a story. Patera came out swinging, using his size and raw strength to beat Backlund down. But Backlund, who was more of a technical wrestler, dug deep and fought back with this fiery rage that completely lit up the crowd. Before long, both guys were bleeding. Chairs got involved. It looked more like a street fight than a wrestling match, and the fans in the Garden ate it up. When Backlund finally overcame Patera's brute strength and pulled out the win, the place went absolutely nuts. It wasn't just about the blood or the weapons, it was about the psychology. Patera was the unstoppable bully, and Backlund was the underdog champion who refused to quit. Every fan in that building believed in what they were seeing. That's why the match was named Match of the Year. It showed that Patera wasn't just a big, scary villain. He could actually tell an amazing story inside the ring. But wrestling moves fast, and by 1982, Patera was onto something new. He left WWF and joined the AWA, and that's where he linked up with Bobby the Brain Heenan. If you know wrestling, you know the Heenan family was the place for villains, and Patera was the perfect fit. He had the size, the real athletic background, and the attitude. He was the muscle, the guy you didn't want to mess with. And in the AWA, that meant going after Hulk Hogan. This was before Hogan became the global superstar in WWF, but he was already massive in the AWA. Fans loved him, so of course Heenan made Hogan the target. Patera wrestled Hogan all over the country. He later said they wrestled about 200 times. That's insane. Every territory wanted that match. And in 1983, Patera teamed up with Jerry Blackwell, and along with manager Sheikh Adnan El-Kaisi, won the AWA tag team titles. That solidified him as one of the top villains in the company. But then real life came crashing in. And it wasn't just some scandal that got swept under the rug. This one blew everything up. April 6, 1984. Waukesha, Wisconsin. Patera and fellow wrestler Masa Saito tried to get food at a McDonald's after hours. The place was closed. They were told no. And depending on who you believe, this is where things went off the rails. The story that went around was that Patera, furious, threw a giant rock through the McDonald's window. He's always denied it. But that's what got reported. When the police came to their hotel later, things got ugly. Patera and Saito ended up fighting the cops. Not a wrestling fight, a real one. They were arrested, and eventually both got sentenced to 2 years in prison. And just like that, his career was stopped dead in its tracks. Imagine going from main eventing against Hogan one night to sitting in a cell the next. It was one of the most shocking downfalls in wrestling at the time. When he finally got out early for good behavior in 1987, WWF brought him back. And here's the thing, they didn't try to hide the prison stuff, they leaned into it. Patera came back as a babyface, cutting promos about how Bobby Heenan had abandoned him while he was locked up. It was one of the first times WWF blurred the line between reality and storyline, and it worked because fans already knew what happened. The real-life prison sentence gave the whole thing weight. But here's the sad part. Prison had done a number on him. He'd lost a lot of his conditioning. In the ring, he got winded quickly. He just didn't have the same stamina he once did. Instead of being the unstoppable monster, he ended up stuck in tag matches so he wouldn't have to carry the whole load. The decline was obvious. You could see it in his matches. And maybe that's what made his comeback story hit harder. It wasn't just a guy playing a role. You could see the struggle. You could see that prison had cost him something he was never going to get back. On screen, he was fighting the Heenan family. Off screen, he was fighting his own body. And fans could feel that. It made the whole thing more real, even if it wasn't the triumphant comeback he wanted. Ken Patera never returned to the top of the mountain after that. He wasn't headlining against Hogan anymore. He wasn't the terrifying heel that fans feared in the late 70s and early 80s. But his story stuck with people. Because it wasn't just about wrestling, it was about choices, consequences, and how quickly everything can change. When you look back at Ken Patera's career, one of the big talking points is always how much people seem to hate him. And yeah, in the ring, that was absolutely true. He was built up as this monster heel who fans wanted to boo out of the building. But when you peel back the curtain, the story isn't so simple. The truth is, a lot of the guys he feuded with actually liked and respected him. Take Bruno Sammartino, for example. On screen, Patera was this nightmare opponent trying to take Bruno's spot. But off screen, Patera later said he learned a ton from Bruno, and he spoke really highly of him. Same thing with Hulk Hogan. In interviews, Patera said they sold out everywhere together, and he figured he wrestled Hogan more than 200 times. Think about that, 200 times. You don't do that many matches with someone unless there's respect and trust there. So while the crowd thought it was pure hatred, in reality it was just two pros doing business and making each other look great. And that's kind of the secret to Patera's whole legacy. He was so good at making fans believe. He had the real athletic background, Olympic weightlifting, legitimate strongman credentials. So when he played the villain, it felt real. He wasn't just pretending to be strong, he was strong. And he knew how to use that to get under people's skin. That's why when he made the shift from babyface to heel, it worked so well. People could buy into him as this unstoppable, cruel powerhouse. His rivalries weren't just about belts either. They were about personality clashes. Bruno was the people's hero. Backlund was the clean-cut technician. Hogan was the rising superstar. And then you had Patera, this brute who looked like he could ruin anyone's night. That contrast made arenas sell out, made fans lose their minds, and even made critics sit up and take notice. But there's another layer here, and it's a little tragic. Patera had the kind of legit athletic foundation most wrestlers could only dream of. Olympic athlete, world-class strength, credibility for days. And for a while, he channeled all of that into one of the best villain runs of his era. But his real-life choices, the prison sentence, and the toll it took on his body cut his prime short. When he came back as a babyface, the story was strong, but the man himself wasn't at the same level. He'd get winded, he'd slow down, and you could see the difference. So when people talk about Ken Patera today, it's not just a list of matches or titles. It's a story of highs and lows, of real strength and real flaws blending together. He was the athlete, the heel, the legend, and the man who proved that sometimes your biggest rival isn't the guy across the ring. It's yourself. And if you're into stories like this, where wrestling history mixes with real life in the craziest ways, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment about your favorite Patera moment, and subscribe for more deep dives. We've got plenty more wild wrestling stories. Hello, ladies. That's Val Venis, Sean Morley in real life, the adult film star who turned pro wrestler and feuded with whoever came his way. God, his ego was too big, and that's what everyone hated about him. From Dustin to Ken, here are all the big reasons why wrestlers hated working with Val. But before the real juice, here is a quick background check. Sean Morley's path to becoming Val Venis actually started years earlier in Oakville, Ontario, Canada, where he was born in 1971. He trained under names like The Missing Link, Jason Robertson, Dory Funk Jr., and Tom Pritchard, so he had a pretty strong wrestling education before he even debuted in the mid-90s. Before WWE, he wrestled all over the world under different names like Scott Borders, Sean Morgan, Steel, and El Steel. He spent time in All Japan Pro Wrestling, learning the hard-hitting Japanese style, and in Mexico's CMLL, where he actually learned conversational Spanish and won the CMLL World Heavyweight Championship in 1997. That title win proved he could really wrestle and wasn't just a guy who needed a flashy gimmick to get noticed. When WWE signed him in 1998, The idea for his character came from writer Vince Russo, who thought Morley looked like an adult star. Vince McMahon personally pitched it to him, saying they could do something else if he didn't like the idea. At first, Morley thought it would just be a Hollywood actor gimmick, but when he found out it would be an adult film star, he leaned into it completely. WWE started airing vignettes on Raw in March of 1998, showing his character's life outside the ring, complete with a cameo from real-life adult star Jenna Jameson. By the time he wrestled his first match on May 18, 1998, fans already knew who he was supposed to be. His entrance towel drop and "Hello Ladies" quickly became some of the most memorable parts of the show. The big problem with his character was that it was so specific and outrageous that it was hard to repackage him as a serious main event wrestler. Once you've been introduced to the audience as an adult star, it's not easy to suddenly convince them you're a top championship threat. But above this, Val was totally hated for his feuds. When people talk about wrestlers that other wrestlers didn't like working with, Val Venis comes up a lot. And the thing is, it's not because he was dangerous in the ring or anything like that. It's a mix of a few things. How he acted backstage, the limits of his gimmick, and the stuff he's done and said since leaving wrestling. All of that together made him someone a lot of people didn't enjoy being around. In the locker room, he had a reputation. People describe him as arrogant, full of himself, or just hard to be around. In wrestling, how you get along with people behind the scenes matters a lot. You can be a good wrestler, but if you rub people the wrong way, it sticks. Later in his career, he even admitted he had lost passion for wrestling. In one interview, he said that during a match in TNA with Christopher Daniels, he didn't care about the outcome and thought Daniels should have won. When someone says something like that, it's not hard to imagine how that might feel for the people still giving it their all every night. If you're in a locker room full of guys busting themselves in the ring, having someone there who is just going through the motions doesn't exactly earn respect. Even after he retired, his personality stayed pretty abrasive. There are videos of him arguing with people, getting confrontational, just generally looking for a fight. And while that's all after his time in WWE, it adds to how people see him. When it comes to his actual wrestling, some people think he was underrated. Others think he was just decent and nothing special. The big issue was his gimmick. In 1998, during the Attitude Era, WWE gave him the role of an adult star character. It worked for the time. He had the "Hello Ladies" catchphrase, the towel, the comedy segments. Fans reacted to it, but it also came with a limit. Nobody was going to believe that character could beat The Rock or Stone Cold or The Undertaker for the world title. That meant he was stuck in the mid-card. Even if he had the skills, his character made it impossible to move up higher. WWE tried to change things. They put him in Right to Censor. They made him Eric Bischoff's chief of staff, but fans still thought of him as Val Venis. By the time he changed his look and shaved his head, it was too late. Then there's the stuff after wrestling that hurt his reputation even more. He has been very outspoken politically, especially with libertarian ideas, conspiracy theories, and controversial opinions about the trans community. One of the biggest moments was in 2020 when AEW crowned Nyla Rose, a transgender woman, as women's champion. Val went on social media saying only a real woman should hold the belt. Wrestlers like Cody and Dustin Rhodes called him out for it. Fans got so fed up that someone bought the valvenis.com website and redirected it to the National Center for Transgender Equality. In 2024, he doubled down on those comments and told a trans fan in a photo with Cody Rhodes that they needed Jesus instead of affirming a mental disorder. By then, a lot of people had just written him off completely. On top of that, he has spread COVID vaccine misinformation and got banned from Twitter for posting a photo he claimed showed Hunter Biden and Malia Obama, which wasn't true. All of this has made fans and wrestlers want to distance themselves from him. Back in the day, though, he was in some of the most over-the-top storylines of the Attitude Era. His first big one was with Kai and Tai. The story was that he had an affair with the wife of their manager, Yamaguchi-san. They got revenge by tying him up backstage and trying to cut off his private parts with a sword. The next week, Val came out and said he was saved by a little shrinkage in John Wayne Bobbitt. Then came the feud with Goldust. Val made a film with Goldust's real-life wife, Terry Runnels. She became his on-screen girlfriend. Goldust returned to his old character, and they feuded for months. There was even a fake pregnancy storyline. And then there was Ken Shamrock. Val made a movie called Saving Ryan's Privates, starring Shamrock's storyline sister. That led to a feud where Val actually won the Intercontinental Championship. He only held it for about a month, but it's still one of his biggest career moments. Almost all of his feuds followed the same pattern. Val would seduce or sleep with someone close to his opponent, and that would start the fight. It was his thing. It worked for the time, but it was one note. And when WWE moved away from adult-themed characters, there wasn't much left for him to do. So why did wrestlers not like working with Val Venis? Some of it is personal. He could be arrogant, hard to get along with, and seem to stop caring later in his career. Some of it is professional. His gimmick kept him from being taken seriously. And a lot of it is everything that's happened since. His political rants, his offensive comments, his conspiracy theories. All of it has left a bad taste for fans and wrestlers. Even with all the controversy and the limits of his character, Val Venis still won a good number of titles in his career. He wasn't just the guy with the towel and the catchphrase. On paper, he actually did pretty well for himself. In WWE, he won the Intercontinental Championship twice. Back in the late 90s, that was a big deal. The IC title was usually given to wrestlers the company saw as a step below the main event, but still important. For Val, it showed that fans liked him and the company trusted him. He also held the European Championship once. That belt didn't have the same prestige, but it still meant TV time and storylines. And he was a WWE Tag Team Champion once with Lance Storm. They were total opposites. Storm was serious and all about wrestling. Val was loud and all about his character. But somehow it worked. Before WWE, Sean Morley was already winning championships. In Puerto Rico's WWC, he won the television championship 4 times. He also held the Caribbean heavyweight title once and the WWC tag team titles 3 times with Glamour Boy Shane and Rex King. In Mexico, wrestling under the name Steel, he even became CMLL World Heavyweight Champion. That's their top belt and one of the most respected titles in the world, so it was a big accomplishment for a foreign wrestler. He also got recognition from Pro Wrestling Illustrated. In 1999, they ranked him number 25 in their list of the top 500 wrestlers in the world. In 2003, they put him at number 331 on their list of the 500 best singles wrestlers ever up to that point. Val stayed in WWE for about 10 years. That's impressive because a lot of characters from that era didn't last long once fans moved on. But Val kept finding ways to stay relevant. His Hello Ladies entrance was one of the most memorable of the time. The music, the slow towel drop, the wink to the camera. Fans knew exactly what was coming, and they loved it. People said his character was sexual but still TV-friendly and funny without being too over the top. Even when he lost matches, he could still get a big reaction the next week. His storylines also mixed in real-life names, which was a big thing in the Attitude Era. Adult film star Jenna Jameson appeared with him in vignettes. John Wayne Bobbitt showed up during the Choppy Choppy storyline. It was all about shock value and grabbing attention. But here's the thing. For as popular as Val was, his actual wrestling was usually seen as good, but not amazing. He was solid in the ring, but not at the same level as guys like Kurt Angle or Chris Benoit. Most of his success came from his charisma, his mic skills, and the wildness of his gimmick. That meant he had a ceiling. He was never going to be the guy headlining WrestleMania against Stone Cold or The Rock. That's where the debate about his legacy comes in. Some people think he should be in the WWE Hall of Fame. They say it's not just about in-ring ability. It's about entertainment, impact, and how much you help define an era. By that standard, Val fits. His name and gimmick are still remembered when people talk about the Attitude Era. Others say no way. They argue he was a mid-card act whose character only worked in a time when WWE was more adult-themed. They also point to the last few years, where his political rants, conspiracy theories, and offensive comments have made a lot of fans and wrestlers turn away from him. The Hall of Fame talk shows how much a wrestler's life after the ring can change how people see their career. If you only look at the 90s and early 2000s, Val was a solid performer who made people laugh, won a few titles, and stayed on TV for a long time. But if you add in everything since, the online fights, the controversial opinions, it's a different story. So when you look back at Val Venis, it's hard not to see him as one of the most Attitude-Era characters ever created. He was over the top, ridiculous, and somehow charming all at once. He could make you laugh one week, shake your head the next, and still get you to pop for that "hello ladies" every time. In his prime, he fit right in with the chaos of late 90s WWE, and he left his mark with storylines that are still remembered today, for better or worse. But I think that's what makes talking about him so tricky. On one hand, you have the character, a total time capsule of wrestling's wildest era, someone who played his role perfectly and gave fans some unforgettable moments. On the other hand, you've got Sean Morley, the man behind the gimmick, whose in-ring work was decent but never spectacular, and whose real-life personality and post-wrestling comments have left a bad taste for a lot of people. It's strange how time changes things. Back then, Val Venis was just part of the fun. Now his legacy is tangled up in controversy and debate. Some fans will always remember him with a smile and a laugh, while others just can't get past what's happened since. And that's the thing about wrestling. We don't just remember the characters, we remember the people who played them and what they did long after the cameras stopped rolling. For me, Val Venis will always be a reminder of how unique that era was. He's proof that sometimes a character can be incredibly popular without ever being a main eventer. He's also proof that your actions outside the ring can have just as much impact on how you're remembered as what you did inside it. Whether you see him as an Attitude-Era icon, a mid-card comedy act, or someone whose legacy has been tarnished, there's no denying he was a part of wrestling history you can't just erase. And maybe that's the most honest way to sum him up. A name you can't talk about the Attitude Era without mentioning, but one that's always going to spark mixed feelings. Now I want to hear from you. Should Val Venis be remembered as an Attitude-Era icon, or does his real-life behavior cancel out the good? And here's a couple of bonus questions for the hardcore fans. Do you remember the short-lived Chief Morley phase when he was Eric Bischoff's chief of staff? And what about that 2000 match against Rikishi, where he came out in the towel but with a steel chest protector underneath? Genius or just weird booking? Drop your answers in the comments, hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive, and don't forget to subscribe for more wrestling history you won't hear anywhere else. He was called a bully, a brute, and the most miserable man to wrestle. But Billy Robinson said they were all just soft, and that's why a lot of wrestlers flat out hated working with him. But the reason wasn't as simple. He wasn't hated because he was bad in the ring. Quite the opposite. He was so good and so committed to wrestling being real that many wrestlers found him impossible to deal with. Some say he was tough but fair. Others say he was a bully who liked to hurt people. The truth is what you're about to find out. Billy was born William Alfred Robinson on September 18, 1938 in Manchester, England. As a kid, he dreamed about being a boxer, but when he was around 14 years old, something happened that changed his life. While playing with other kids, he got hit in the eye by either a Coca-Cola box or a metal sign. It sliced his retina and left him unable to box. Wrestling, though, was still possible. And not just any wrestling. He ended up at the most feared wrestling gym in England, Billy Riley's famous Snake Pit in Wigan. This was not a friendly training environment. The place was bare bones, cold, dirty, no comfort at all. Training there was brutal. Riley had no patience for anyone who showed weakness. If you were slow, if you complained, if you couldn't handle the pain, you were out. Billy spent 8 years in that room. 8 years of being stretched, slammed, and pushed to his limit. That kind of training shaped him forever. He became hard, both physically and mentally. He believed in wrestling as a fight, not an act. That made him a nightmare for anyone who came into the ring expecting an easy night. In 1969, Billy went to Canada to work for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling. The next year, he joined Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association. He stayed there until retiring in 1988. After that, he didn't walk away from wrestling. He started coaching. His students included Kazushi Sakuraba, Josh Barnett, Marty Jones, and Johnny Saint, all of whom became stars in wrestling or MMA. His influence spread far beyond his own matches. But here's where his reputation gets tricky. Billy wrestled the same way he trained, stiff, snug, and real. If you were in the ring with him, you were going to feel it. He didn't believe in pulling moves or making things easy. To him, if a hold didn't hurt at least a little, it didn't look real. Many wrestlers hated this. They were used to the style where safety and performance came first. Billy's style meant sore ribs, twisted joints, and sometimes worse. He was known for bullying people. If he thought you were lazy, sloppy, or disrespectful to wrestling, he'd crank a hold tighter or hit you harder. Some saw this as him protecting the business. When it comes to Billy Robinson, one of the most famous stories people love to tell is about his fight with Peter Maivia. You might know Peter as the High Chief, a Samoan wrestling legend and the grandfather of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Peter Maivia had a reputation. In the ring, he was respected, but outside of it, he could get wild, especially when he had been drinking. He was the kind of guy you didn't want to provoke when he was in a bad mood. Billy Robinson had a reputation too, but for something different. He was one of the toughest men in wrestling, a master of catch wrestling, a real grappler who could take anyone apart if he needed to. So you can see why this story is so famous. Two men who were both dangerous in different ways, ending up in the same place at the wrong time. The Rock has told his version of the fight in interviews. In his version, Peter Maivia pulled Billy Robinson's eye out and threw him through a restaurant window. It's the kind of story you never forget once you hear it. The problem is, Billy Robinson said that version was total nonsense. His exact words were that it was bullshit. Other people who were there agreed with him. This is how wrestling works sometimes. There's a tradition called kayfabe, where you treat the made-up drama like it's real. And even outside the ring, wrestlers will sometimes keep telling stories the same way. The fight becomes a bigger legend every time it's told. Whether the details are true or not almost doesn't matter. The story takes on a life of its own. So what really happened? In Billy Robinson's own book, he says the fight happened in Japan. They were in a restaurant. Peter Maivia had been drinking heavily and started to get aggressive. Robinson stepped in, probably thinking he could calm him down. That's when Maivia bit him hard on the face or neck. The bite was so deep that Robinson had scars from it for the rest of his life. Billy Robinson was tough, but that bite was too much. In his mind, a bite like that wasn't just an attack, it was an attempt to kill him. He reacted instantly. He hit Maivia several times and put him down. Robinson says the whole thing lasted about 15 seconds. By the end, Maivia had a broken nose and 2 black eyes. Robinson had to go to the hospital for stitches and a shot to stop any infection from the human bite. The next morning, Robinson saw Maivia again. This time he was sober. Robinson said Maivia backed down right away. There are other versions of this fight. Wrestler Pat Barrett said Maivia punched Robinson through a window before biting him. George Gordienko said Maivia started the fight by throwing punches too. Superstar Billy Graham went even further, saying Maivia was eating him through his t-shirt with blood everywhere and chunks of skin hanging out. And there's another myth about this fight that needs clearing up. Some people say it's how Billy Robinson got his crooked eye. That's not true. Robinson explained that the eye injury happened when he was a kid, maybe 14 years old, when a Coca-Cola box or a metal sign sliced his retina. That's what stopped him from becoming a boxer and pushed him toward wrestling in the first place. No matter which version of the fight you believe, one thing is certain. This story made Billy Robinson's reputation even bigger. People already knew he was dangerous. This just proved it to them in a way they'd never forget. Then there's superstar Billy Graham's story about Robinson. Graham was one of the most charismatic wrestlers of his time. He had the look, the muscles, the clothes, the sunglasses, and the gift of gab. But in his 2006 book Tangled Ropes, he had some strong words for Billy Robinson. Graham said Robinson was a bully in the ring, that he took liberties with less experienced wrestlers and roughed them up on purpose, that he didn't like guys from bodybuilding or football backgrounds and went out of his way to hurt them. Graham called him an old school shooter, which in wrestling means someone who can and will wrestle for real if they feel like it. Then comes the part that really jumps out. Graham claimed that when they were in Stampede Wrestling together, he taped razor blades to his hands backstage. He said he told Robinson, "If you try to shoot on me, I'll shred you from your face to your toes." It's a shocking image, the kind of detail that makes people lean forward and listen. But here's the problem. Graham admitted in his own book that he has made up serious stories before for personal gain. He said he lied to federal prosecutors about Vince McMahon. He said he invented child abuse claims against WWF officials to try to get hush money. He even called it the most shameful thing he had ever done. If someone is willing to make up something that extreme, you have to be careful about believing every story they tell about someone else. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. No one else has confirmed it. The point is that these stories, whether they're true, half true, or just made up, all add to the same image of Billy Robinson. The fight with Peter Maivia, the razor blade threat from Billy Graham, they all make him sound like a man you didn't want to mess with under any circumstances. Billy Robinson's name carried weight not just in the ring but in the gym. As a coach, people either respected him deeply or thought he was the biggest bully in the business. There didn't seem to be much middle ground. Plenty of wrestlers have said Robinson could be rough. Greg Gagne talked about it more than once. On forums and in summaries of his book, people describe him as the biggest bully they had ever met. It wasn't just one or two stories passed around over the years. It was a pattern. But if you asked Robinson, he would tell you they were wrong. He didn't see himself that way at all. In his mind, he was a teacher. He believed his job was to pass on the real way to wrestle, not to hurt anyone for the sake of it. He talked about proper technique, mat training, and learning how to win a real fight. He said he hated bullies, even going off on long rants about how cowardly they were and how they always backed down when challenged. The strange thing is that in his own book, he told stories that make the picture more complicated. One story was about Karl Gotch, another legendary wrestler, telling him he needed to hurt one of his students to get them in line. Robinson refused at first. He said it wasn't his job to injure people. But a week later, after an argument with his wife, he showed up to the gym in a bad mood. One of the young Japanese wrestlers mouthed off to him. Robinson lined up the students and wrestled them one after another. By the end, one had a broken arm. He called it an accident, but he also said that after it happened, the students treated him with more respect and took training more seriously. That one incident sums up the contradiction. Robinson didn't think he was a bully, but his style of training, forged in the brutal snake pit under Billy Riley, was intense enough to cross the line into injury. To him, it was just part of learning. To others, it was way too far. Wrestling had changed by the time Robinson became a coach. The younger generation wasn't used to that kind of hard training. His way of doing things could feel outdated or even dangerous. That gap in expectations is part of why the bully label stuck. And this wasn't just about his work as a coach. Inside the ring, Robinson had a reputation for being stiff and unwilling to compromise. In wrestling, a stiff worker is someone who hits hard and applies holds for real instead of making them look painful without actually causing harm. Robinson was a shooter, which meant he could win a match for real if he wanted to. That kind of skill made him dangerous, but it also made him a difficult opponent for anyone who didn't share his approach. When he arrived in North America and joined Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association, it seemed like the perfect match. The AWA valued legitimate wrestlers, and Robinson was about as real as they came. He quickly racked up championships, winning the AWA British Empire Heavyweight title 3 times and the World Tag Team titles twice. He even starred with Gagne in the 1974 movie The Wrestler. His technical skills allowed him to wrestle world champions like Dory Funk Jr. and Vern Gagne to draws, and he went 60 minutes with Bob Backlund while Backlund held the WWF title. But even with those achievements, Robinson never reached the top level in the AWA. Some said it was because of wrestling politics. Others believed it was because he was hard to work with. Greg Gagne recalled that Ray Stevens, one of the best performers of the era, didn't like wrestling Robinson because Robinson wouldn't adapt. He stuck to his style and didn't blend it with Stevens' way of working. Then there was the infamous match in Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling. Robinson was facing Archie Gouldie, the champion at the time. Midway through, Gouldie left the match, went to Hart, and quit. His complaint was that Robinson wouldn't sell for him, wouldn't make Gouldie's moves look convincing, and roughed him up too much. The result was that Robinson ended up with the title simply because Gouldie refused to get back in the ring. Stories like that cemented Robinson's reputation. In Japan, his refusal to compromise made him a legend. Fans there respected the idea of a wrestler who was as real as possible. But in the United States during the 1980s, wrestling was heading in a different direction. Vince McMahon's WWF was becoming more about characters, spectacle, and entertainment than about pure athletic competition. In that world, you had to sell your opponent's offense and tell a story in the ring. Robinson wasn't interested in changing who he was to fit that model. The AWA, for a time, stood against that trend. They kept pushing legitimate wrestling. But when Hulk Hogan left for the WWF, it was clear the business was changing. The glitz and larger-than-life personalities of the WWF were taking over. The AWA's old-school approach was being left behind. Robinson's style, once an asset, became a roadblock to bigger opportunities. It was the same story in Britain. Promoters liked the credibility he brought to the sport, but they didn't build him up as the star he could have been. His authenticity was both his greatest strength and his biggest obstacle. That's why Robinson's legacy is such a mixed picture. As a coach, he produced top fighters and wrestlers. As a competitor, he earned the respect of the toughest men in the sport. But his unwillingness to adapt, whether in training or in the ring, meant that not everyone saw him as a hero. For some, he was a mentor who pushed them to be their best. For others, he was the man who took things too far. Many wrestlers who disliked working with Billy Robinson had different reasons. Some clashed with his personality, others with his style, and some just weren't ready for the toughness he brought to the ring and the gym. That toughness came from his start in the snake pit, where wrestling was about survival and real skill, not performance. Robinson carried that approach for life. He saw wrestling as a fight first. His holds were real, his training was intense, and he didn't water down his style to make opponents look good. That earned him respect from purists, but also a reputation for being hard to work with. As a coach, he denied being a bully, but his old-school, hands-on methods sometimes left students hurt, which only reinforced that image for some. In an era where wrestling was shifting toward entertainment, Robinson stayed committed to authenticity. That limited his mainstream opportunities, but his influence was huge. He helped spread catch wrestling, shape Japanese shoot style, and trained fighters who became legends in wrestling and MMA. Billy Robinson stayed true to himself, even when it cost him. For some, he was too tough. For others, he was unforgettable. His legacy stands as a reminder of the real side of professional wrestling. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more wrestling history like this. And don't forget to turn on the bell so you'll know when the next video drops. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Billy Robinson was really a bully, or was he just an old school coach who played by tougher rules? Let's talk about it down there.
The Ultimate Warrior! It is! Look at that! The Ultimate Warrior! What is he doing? Is he going to attack Hogan? What is going on here?
The Ultimate Warrior was one of the most unforgettable names in wrestling. If you watched WWF in the late 80s or early 90s, you remember him. Wild face paint, huge muscles, sprinting to the ring at full speed, shaking the ropes like he was about to tear them down. He had an energy that made crowds go crazy, and for a while he was at the very top. He won the Intercontinental and WWF championships, even beating Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. But while fans saw him as a larger-than-life hero, the people who worked with him often had a very different opinion. Behind the scenes, he was a man hated by everyone. Why? Let's get into it. A big part of the problem was his attitude. Plenty of wrestlers say he didn't seem to care much about the business or the people in it. He kept to himself, avoided the locker room, and gave off this vibe that he was above everyone else. Bobby Heenan, who managed wrestlers and worked as a commentator, flat out said he didn't like Warrior. He told one story about asking Warrior not to hit him in the neck during a match because of an injury. Warrior went ahead and did it anyway. When Heenan called him out on it, Warrior just said, "I never know what I'm going to do." That might sound exciting to fans, but in wrestling, unpredictability like that can be dangerous. He also clashed with Andre the Giant, one of the most respected guys in the business. Warrior kept hitting Andre with these hard clotheslines, and after taking one too many, Andre finally just stuck his massive fist out mid-match and dropped him. From then on, Warrior was gentle with Andre, but the story spread and made him look reckless. Their matches were so bad that wrestling magazines named their feud the worst of the year. Other wrestlers had similar run-ins with him. Randy Savage, who was famous for planning every detail of a match, once sent Warrior an 18-page fax with their entire WrestleMania 7 match mapped out. Warrior was overwhelmed but followed Savage's lead and pulled it off. Still, it showed how much he relied on more experienced guys to carry him through. Jake Roberts had a big storyline planned with Warrior in 1991, but Warrior quit before it could happen. That cost Jake a lot of money and a planned title run. He was furious at the time, though they patched things up years later. When it came to actual wrestling skill, the Ultimate Warrior was more hype than technique. He looked like a superhero ripped from a comic book. Face paint blazing, neon tassels flying, muscles carved like stone. The moment his music hit, the arena would explode. He'd sprint to the ring at full throttle, shake the ropes like a man possessed. And by the time the bell rang, he was already winded. His matches were short, not because they were booked that way, but because he burned himself out before the fight even started. Opponents had to slow things down just so he could catch his breath. In his legendary WrestleMania clash with Hulk Hogan, Hogan even faked a knee injury mid-match, just to give them both a chance to rest. The critics didn't hold back. Wrestling magazines awarded Warrior Worst Wrestler and Most Overrated more than once. But Warrior himself didn't seem bothered. To him, the gimmick, the energy, the presence, the spectacle was what mattered. And in the late 80s WWF, he wasn't wrong. That era thrived on larger-than-life characters, and Warrior was one of the biggest. But wrestling changed in the 90s. The audience started craving more from the action. Tighter pacing, deeper in-ring storytelling, real technical skill. Warrior never adapted. To the wrestlers who had spent years perfecting their craft, it felt like he was cashing in on the spotlight without putting in the same work. Then came the safety controversies. In WCW, for one of his dramatic entrances, a trapdoor was hidden under the ring. During the match, British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith landed on it, injuring his back so badly he came close to paralysis. For many in the locker room, that was proof Warrior always put showmanship ahead of safety. The Ultimate Warrior was a paradox. He could ignite an arena before throwing a single punch, yet the matches rarely lived up to the energy he brought to the entrance. In the 80s, that was enough to make him a megastar. But as wrestling evolved, the business and the fans moved on. But the hatred for Warrior was far from over. Some of his most explosive fights happened behind the scenes, and Vince McMahon was almost always in the other corner. The summer of 1991 was the boiling point. Just weeks before SummerSlam, Warrior sent Vince a letter that was more like a threat. "Pay me $550,000 or I don't show up for the main event." He said the money was owed from WrestleMania 7, where he believed he'd been promised Hogan money, the kind of huge payoff Hulk Hogan commanded. When the check came in lower than expected, Warrior felt Vince wasn't keeping his word. He even tried going through Linda McMahon, who he saw as someone he could trust, but nothing changed. The timing couldn't have been worse for Vince. SummerSlam's big tag team match was set, and Warrior walking out would blow up the whole card. Vince later admitted he felt he had no choice but to accede to exorbitant demands, just to save the show. He paid Warrior what he wanted, but the second Warrior walked backstage after the match, Vince handed him a suspension letter. Dated August 26, 1991, it accused Warrior of being impossible to work with and of forgetting his obligations to the company and the fans. Vince defended paying Hogan more by pointing out Hogan's fame, longevity, and drawing power. Backstage, the reaction was furious. Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter reportedly wanted to confront Warrior physically. Jake the Snake Roberts, who had a major feud planned with Warrior, was livid. The firing killed the storyline and cost him a guaranteed payday. To most people in the business, it looked like Warrior had just held the company hostage. But from Warrior's point of view, it was his only way to make Vince honor what he saw as a promise. Wrestling was a business without a union or standard contracts, and sometimes the only leverage a wrestler had was the threat of walking. It was risky, and in this case, it blew up his reputation. Vince got his match, then cut him loose without hesitation. A ruthless move, but pure business. It wasn't the last time. In 1992, Warrior was gone again, officially for failing a drug test. Vince claimed he'd been experimenting with growth hormone. Warrior denied it, saying the real problem was unpaid merchandise royalties. He claimed WWF was selling his merch without giving him his share. In 1996, Vince brought him back, only to fire him a few months later. Vince said he'd skipped several house shows. Warrior said he was grieving his father's death. Vince didn't buy it, pointing out they hadn't seen each other in years. Warrior once again claimed it was about merchandise royalties. After leaving WWF, Warrior tried WCW in 1998. His run there was short, dominated by a hyped but disappointing rematch with Hogan and more disagreements over pay. Within months, he was out again. Through it all, a pattern kept repeating. Warrior was unpredictable. He'd miss dates, show up late, or stay away from the locker room entirely. He fought for creative control, refusing to let the company turn him heel because he believed it would crush his merchandise sales. He saw himself as a brand, and he wasn't about to let Vince change it. Yet every time things blew up, Vince would eventually bring him back. If Warrior was truly impossible to work with, why? The answer was simple: money. Warrior was a draw, and when WWF needed a boost, Vince was willing to overlook everything else. As people in the business would say, Vince would put shit behind him if he could make money. Warrior knew it too. He understood his value and wasn't afraid to use it, even if it meant pushing Vince to the edge. Sometimes it got him exactly what he wanted. Other times, it cost him his job. In the short term, he could win. In the long run, it made him unstable in the business. When Warrior's wrestling days were over, the fights didn't stop. They just changed arenas. Instead of a ring, it was courtrooms. And now the battles were about something even more personal than titles or paychecks. Who owned the Warrior himself? In 1993, Jim Hellwig took a step that shocked a lot of people. He legally changed his name to Warrior, not just as a stage name, but his actual legal name. His kids even have Warrior as their last name. It was his way of saying, "This is mine. No one's taking it from me." That move set off years of legal clashes with WWF. In the mid-90s, both sides went to court over who owned the Warrior and Ultimate Warrior names. The look, the face paint, even the way he moved and talked in the ring. This was not just about money, it was about the character's soul. And in a rare win for a wrestler against Vince McMahon's company, the court sided with Warrior. He could use the name, the gear, and the gimmick anywhere he wanted. In a business where the promotion usually owns everything, that was huge. And he did not stop there. Warrior went after anyone he thought was using his image without permission. One case even targeted video game maker THQ for using his designs. When they tried to get it thrown out, the court refused. Time and again, he proved he was serious about protecting what he saw as his legacy. But while Warrior had the legal rights locked down, WWE had another weapon: the power to tell the story. In 2005, almost 10 years after he had last worked for them, the company released it were the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. On paper, it was a career retrospective. In reality, it came across like a 90-minute roast with no punchlines. The documentary was packed with old footage and interviews from wrestlers and staff. Almost all of them were negative. They said his promos made no sense. They called him unprofessional. They tore into his in-ring work. Critics called it a hit piece and could not believe WWE would put so much effort into trashing their own former star. WWE had invited Warrior to take part, but he refused. He did not want anything to do with their version of the story. That decision meant his voice was not in it, and the only voices left were the ones that did not have much good to say. Bruce Pritchard, a WWE executive, later claimed the negativity was not intentional, just honest opinions. But to Warrior, it felt like character assassination. In early 2006, a few months after the DVD came out, Warrior sued WWE in Arizona, accusing them of damaging his reputation. He said the whole thing was wrong, and more importantly, hurtful. For him, it was not just business, it was personal. The case dragged on for years before being dismissed in 2009. WWE had won that fight. For Warrior, it was a bitter loss after his earlier victories over the company in the trademark battles. He still owned the Warrior name, but WWE controlled the bigger stage, and with it, the louder voice. A lot of people saw the DVD as WWE's way of getting even after losing the rights to his character. For almost 2 decades, the tension between Warrior and WWE never really cooled. The lawsuits, the public shots, the constant push and pull over his legacy all became part of the ongoing war. That is why what happened in 2014 shocked so many people. Out of nowhere, the two sides made peace. Warrior returned, and Vince welcomed him back into the fold. That April, he stood on stage at the WWE Hall of Fame, finally being celebrated by the same company that had once tried to bury him. It did not erase the years of bad blood. The firings, the lawsuits, the hit piece documentary all still existed. But for one moment, it did not matter. Warrior had fought for his name, for his image, and for the right to define himself. And now, under the bright lights one last time, he got to stand there as the man he had spent decades fighting to be, Warrior. In conclusion, the heat around the Ultimate Warrior wasn't just about one thing. It was a mix of his behavior in the locker room, the way he worked in the ring, and the constant battles he had with Vince McMahon in WWE. A lot of wrestlers, big names like Andre the Giant, Bobby Heenan, Randy Savage, and Jake Roberts, all had stories about Warrior being unreliable, hard to deal with, and sometimes downright unprofessional. In the ring, Warrior had the look, the energy, and the crowd on his side. But his matches often told a different story. He wasn't known for technical skill, and his stamina was a problem. He could blow himself up just from his entrance. That meant slower matches, tired pacing, and in some cases, dangerous moments for the people working with him. Part of the tension came from Warrior's own philosophy. He openly believed wrestling wasn't really about skill, it was about the gimmick. In the late 80s WWF, he wasn't wrong. Big characters sold tickets. But as wrestling moved into the 90s and fans started wanting more from the matches themselves, Warrior didn't adapt. To the guys who had spent years mastering the craft, that felt like a slap in the face. His relationship with Vince McMahon was its own saga. The most famous clash came before SummerSlam 1991, when Warrior threatened to skip the main event unless he was paid what he claimed he was owed from WrestleMania 7. Vince paid him to keep the show alive and then fired him right after the match. This became a pattern. Warrior would leave, come back, clash again, and leave once more. Vince tolerated it because Warrior drew money, but the tension never went away. Even after he stepped out of the ring, the fights kept going. Warrior legally changed his name to Warrior and went to court to secure the rights to his character. He actually won those battles, a rare victory against WWE. But in 2005, WWE fired back in their own way with the self-destruction of The Ultimate Warrior, a DVD that painted him in the worst possible light. Warrior sued over it, but the case was thrown out. In the end, Warrior's legacy is a mix of brilliance and chaos. He was a larger-than-life star who could electrify a crowd like few others, but also a polarizing figure who burned bridges everywhere he went. The animosity wasn't from one incident. It was the sum of years of professional clashes, personal disputes, and battles for control over his own name. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Ultimate Warrior's wild career, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Was he a misunderstood icon, or exactly what his critics said he was? And if you want more untold wrestling stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.